All right, let's go ahead and welcome the listeners. Let's bring them into our world, all right? Let's get started.
Oh.
Yo, Short Box Nation, welcome back to the podcast. How are you doing today? To all of our new friends joining us for the first time, my name is Botter, here at your service to welcome you to the Short Box Podcast, the comic review and talk show where you hear the best conversations about comic books and the pop culture they inspire. This is episode 379, and if that excellent intro didn't clue you in enough, today is all about today is all about us taking a nostalgic step back into the scholastic book fair era of our lives and revisiting the adventures of comics' terrific tandem of Calvin and Hobbes, as well as paying our respects to the genius behind their creation. He's been called the Bigfoot of comics, but we like to call him Mr. Bill Watterson.
Who says that?
Mr. Bill Watterson.
There's actually a quote. I'll have to find it, but another comic cartoonist had called him.
I like that was a good Stan Lee intro you did. That was nice.
Thank you.
True believers.
I like the alliteration.
Thank you. Now you'll learn why he's called, why he's been called the Bigfoot of comics later on. But let's welcome the panel that's coming along for this trip down memory lane. Here in the studio with me is the exceptional Edmund Danzart.
Oh,
what's up, Ed? How you
what's
doing?
Up?
Yeah, I'm always trying to build you up, Ed. Finding all these $10 words. I'd probably fill that up.
What exceptional is a $10 word? All right,
It's got more than 5 letters.
You're overpaying for whatever
Ed,
you're using.
Come on, all right, man. I'm looking out for you. All right, all right. And calling in from Daddy Daycare is the man responsible for the intro you heard at the top of the show. Short Black Nation. I'm gonna give him a round of applause because it's been a minute. We got Cesar Cordero here with us. What up, C?
For those that know, I was in a ska band called Hamster Huey and the Gooey Kablooey. And if that doesn't prove my Calvin and Hobbes cred, you guys can get that.
That's good.
I'm gonna try to top that.
I wonder if they've ever found his body.
Yeah.
I never heard that story like that before.
All right, and she may not. I'm sorry, and she may not be here in person, but God damn it, is she here in spirit with us. All right, this next shout out is for our sister in podcast arms, our good friend, co-host extraordinaire Ashley Laney Hoy. I want to go ahead and give her and her family a round of applause for the arrival of their precious boy, Shiloh Reese Hoy.
Reese.
All right. Yeah. Super excited about
Covering
that.
from the noodle incident.
That was a good time.
Another deep cut. No?
That was a good time.
So Ashley was having her baby at the same hospital that Sarah works at, and Sarah was able to kind of peek in. And funny story is that after Sarah had her C-section, like, she wasn't able to move, and they kind of advise you, kind of like, hey, just don't really get up. Like, you don't have to. In fact, you shouldn't. So Sarah goes to knock on the door to visit Ashley and Josh, and Ashley answers the door. She's like walking around. She's like, hey, what's up? And Sarah's like, what are you doing? You should be lying down. She's like, I feel fine. I'm like, oh my God.
Yo.
So Ashley already being an irresponsible mom from the jump. Congratulations.
We wouldn't expect anything.
She don't
better,
think
man.
the rules apply to her. That's her problem.
Yeah.
Oh man,
Classic.
we're excited for you, Ashley, and we're dedicating this one to you and your baby boy. All right. And while we're on acknowledgments, let's go ahead and talk about our incredible sponsors, Collective Con and Gotham City Limit. One is North Florida's premier pop culture event, and the other one is North Florida's premier comic shop. Both are the best at what they do, and they play a large part in helping us keep the lights on, alongside the contributions of our incredible Patreon community. And speaking of Patreon, ham-fistedly speaking of Patreon, we owe them a round of applause because this
I thought you were going to say we owe them money.
That money's spent, Jack.
The show's gotten so bad that we owe the patrons money.
No refunds, Jack.
Wait, only at the Short Box would we owe our patrons fucking money.
That money's spent, son.
Hilarious.
Every month. Yo, I promise we'll get better.
We never promised anything.
We are in the negative, all right?
Just to clarify, we never promised that.
Thank you. That's coming from our legal department.
From the legal department?
Yeah. All right. Earlier in December, I believe that was the time, I presented our patrons with 3 classic comic strips to pick from. I wanted to do an episode highlighting the geniuses behind some of our favorite comic strips. So our patrons had the choice between Charles Schultz and Peanuts, Zitz, and Calvin and Hobbes. And the votes
There was
were
no choice.
well, at first they were pretty close. I thought we were going to be doing a Peanuts episode.
For Zits?
Zits.
But Zits is a personal favorite of mine, all right?
Oh,
It was my
okay.
choice to pick the artist spotlight poll, and that's what I went with. I know you're rolling your eyes, see,
Zits.
but I went with Zits.
How
all
many?
right?
How many people voted for
Okay.
Zits?
All right, actually,
Zero?
fuck it, y'all-
One, and
fuck
it's
outta
Butter.
here. All right,
Negative.
fuck outta
Negative.
here.
Can you get a negative on a poll?
Oh, I know Cesar wants to let out a louder laugh, but like I said, he's got a sleeping baby, and I respect.
My daughter is sleeping
Hold on,
right now.
man.
I've tried so hard.
I cannot. Y'all are not going to sit here and disrespect. Let me see. What was
Negative 8%.
Man,
Negative.
wait till we get to that.
I'll show
Wait
you.
all right. Here's the poll results for you assholes. All right. Calvin and Hobbes won their poll with 67% of the votes. Peanuts with 22%, and Zits with 11% of the votes. All right. It third place. Sure, but it wasn't one digit a vote. There was at least one or two other people.
No Far Side? Oh man.
You know, Ed,
Look,
you got to choose.
this man thinks Zits is better than Farside.
I know.
All right, you know what? I'm gonna continue on with my monologue.
Or
all right?
Outland,
County.
Bloom County.
For me, Peanuts, Zits, and Calvin and Hobbes. That's what I wanted. Those are my
Boondocks?
three, right?
No, no Boondocks.
I almost picked Boondocks, but
All right.
But
The
the,
show
but the
is-
beautiful writing and artwork in Zits just completely overshadows anything Aaron
all right.
Magruder has
So
done.
it wasn't
for
the
the
best
movement,
poll.
so.
It wasn't the best poll, but no surprise there. All right, Calvin and Hobbes came out on top, and this is why we get to. This is why we're together today.
Yo, your mom
Now-
has Zits. How about that shit?
Fuck out of here. My mom's got beautiful skin, all right? That's that Moroccan
does.
oil. Natural. Now, if you're a listener that wants to take part in these terrible polls that I pick, or seriously take part in picking the topics that we do discuss, I highly encourage you to join our Patreon community. We'll be looking to our patrons a lot this year to pick the topics for some upcoming episodes we got planned, including one for Ant-Man. We want to do an episode about Kang the Conqueror. I'm going to have some choices for comics for our patrons to pick. And I know the thought of paying for another subscription is daunting, all right?
No,
but
it's not.
I want
No, it's
to
not.
let you... It's not? Moneybags over there?
No.
Mondo posters?
Not at all. No.
Well,
yeah,
for
this
some
is a
of us-
flex, by the way.
Oh, major flex. You gotta if you're watching the video version of this podcast, C took note of all you haters out there complaining about his backdrop, and he brought the Mondo posters out. But for some of us, at least, that aren't money bags like Cordero over there, another subscription is it's a pain in the ass. But I'm gonna tell you straight up, we are not only cheaper than Netflix, but we are way more entertaining. All right, you're actually gonna get your money's worth investing in us, and we're only
You
asking
couldn't
for a
even get
couple
it
of
out.
dollars.
You couldn't even get it out.
I started thinking
You're
how much
so-
we owe. I started thinking how much we owe our patrons.
The patrons.
It's
So
scary.
this guy is not me.
But honestly, we are worth investing a couple of dollars into, especially if you want to support what we do in a bigger way in exchange for bonus episodes, perks, and other rewards that we got going on. Check out our Patreon membership plans by going to shortboxjacks.com or scroll through this episode show notes and click the support this show button. All right, shameless plug is out the way. The table is now set to talk about our main topic today, Bill Watterson and Calvin and Hobbes. Gents, I vividly remember checking out every Calvin and Hobbes book that my middle school library had to offer back in the day, and I occasionally would purposely lose them on purpose and just, hope my mom was okay paying the late fee because I felt like it was worth it. I want to hear from you two. Take me back to the first time that you were exposed to Calvin and Hobbes. What was
you
your
mean
first
stealing? I get it.
stealing?
Now. I get it. Got it.
Purposely lost. I mean, it's a gray area.
I
What do you think,
understand,
legal
yes.
department, Ed? Was I stealing?
There's the what is it? Enough time has elapsed.
There we go.
It's okay.
Thank you so much.
Statute
Thank
of
you for backing me.
limitations.
Statute of
Statute of
limitations.
limitations.
Yep,
There we
it's
go.
over.
See, take me back to the first time that you were exposed to Calvin and Hobbes, man. Do you remember your first conscious exposure?
I do actually. I had to write this down because it's kind of weird, but it's one of the earliest memories I can actually remember. The ones I have. I was 5 years old, and I lived in California at the time with my dad. My dad was stationed in San Diego. He's in the Navy, and I was walking around with my mom and dad at a mall in the 80s, and there was the first collection just simply called Calvin and Hobbes at a B. Dalton bookstore.
Oh,
And-
adult.
yeah, here's what I remember is because I couldn't read at the time. So, but I very, very, very vividly remember seeing Calvin and Hobbes on the cover. And I was like, the artwork is so fantastic. Like it's cartoony, but like the watercolors just pop. It's something it was burned into my brain so much so that the next time I would see a Calvin and Hobbes book would be 5 years later when we moved to Maryland, and that was at the book fair at my elementary school there.
Good stuff. What about you, Ed? You got a favorite memory of the comic strip?
I think my first encounter, I want to say, my brief time in the Boy Scouts.
Wait. We have been recording.
Shout out to all the Weeblos out there.
We have been recording for almost 8-9 years, and
Yeah.
I think that's the first time I ever heard that you were in the Boy Scouts.
And it was not a memorable time.
Was it like for 48 hours or something?
0 badges. Didn't even try.
You just got a participation badge.
No,
Thanks
I didn't
for
get that.
joining, I
I
guess.
don't know. It was very short time, but we went camping, and there was this other kid who, usually when you're young, the kids who draw or have some kind of, artistic, they like doing things artistic. They kind of gravitate towards each other.
Sure.
This one kid was like, "Hey man, you ever see Calvin and Hobbes?" And newspaper strips were still around, but they were on their last legs. They were kind of on their way out, or what represents them were on their way out, or what I would like in a comic strip. So he showed me one of the books, and then like you said, you see that beautiful ink and watercolor cover of like them on the sled, just kind of bursting out of the woods. I forgot which one it was, but
It would
it was
either
one
be
of the smaller
Lazy Day
ones.
Sunday, or you said out of a sled.
Or on the wagon, the radio
okay,
flyer.
Okay, yeah,
I don't know.
It might
I
be the
could be
first
wrong.
Calvin and Hobbes.
Yeah, it could be the first. I could be misremembering it. But he would show me, because those books, they had those kind of nice watercolor intros, like those kind of the ones that weren't in the paper. So I think that's my first exposure to it. And then my folks were getting just the Sunday paper at the time, so I would always ask for the mom would get the coupons, and then I would get the Sunday paper, and they were the top. I think I was reading it towards the end of the run, so where he got like the half page, or a quarter page.
Yeah.
And he was doing some really cool stuff with panels. So I got to see kind of right before he tapped out. So I got to see kind of like his, what he was fighting for the whole time he was doing this stuff. So I got to catch kind of the tail end of his career as a little kid. But I think that's my introduction to the characters.
Cool. All right, and this next part goes to our listeners right now that might not be familiar with Bill Watterson's overarching life and career. I'm about to provide.
Well, what about you, dude?
Oh, well, I mean, the school. I think
He stole it. Remember, he stole it from the library.
Yeah, and it's not completely untrue, but I want to say it was either middle school or high school. Right before I got into as I was getting into superhero comics and the Marvel books my dad had, I would I'd go to the library or any of the Scholastic book fairs, and I was looking for anything comic related. So it just happened to you know how it is at Scholastic. The closest thing to comics you were going to get were either the Marvel
Garfield
universe,
books.
comic strips, and then if it was Marvel related, it might be like a handbook or something like that, or a character guide.
Sure.
You know what I'm talking about? So I would just scoop up those, and then anything comic strip related. And I just remember having this period of trying to read and consume as much Calvin and Hobbes as I could. And I know other kids were into it. We would trade books and trades, and I'd steal those too, and be on the run from bullies and stuff. So,
Jeez.
Yeah, I had a problem as a kid. I still do. But yeah, Calvin Hobbes was really big for me as I was getting into comics and diving into that world. Not Calvin Hobbes specific, but when my grandpa.
Then you saw Zitz, and that just totally took over your.
God, he's never gonna let that down.
Man, this is my jam. Fuck it, man. I am proud to say this is my jam, and you guys will soon
And
learn
you're
that
the
Bill
only one,
Watterson.
yes.
And Bill Watterson also is a fan. So fuck you guys.
I don't think I read that anywhere.
But a memory that I cherish from my younger days, my grandpa on my dad's side, who he lived in Jersey for his whole life, but during the last couple years, maybe 3-4 years of his life, he moved down to stay with us. This is after his wife, my dad's mom, passed away. So he was really like the only one of two only grandparents I really got to know. I only got to know my grandma on my dad's side, for my dad's mom, for only like a couple years, and then she passed away. So I really got to spend time with my grandpa. He lived with us, and because of him, my dad bought a Florida Times Union subscription because my grandpa just loves to read the paper, and he'd get it daily and Sunday, and that was something that we bonded over. I'd come in the garage, he'd be sneaking a pack of cigarettes, knowing damn well he wasn't allowed to smoke, but you know how it is. And he would give me the Sunday paper to keep quiet, like, you know, don't let your dad see this. So yeah, I used to just consume comic strips, man. And Calvin and Hobbes, I mean, wasn't syndicated then, obviously. I mean, it ended in 95. So I was catching up on trades and anything the library or scholastic book fairs had. But it had a big impact, and that's a big reason why I wanted to do an episode highlighting comic strips and, you know, the work that these creators put into, because it was something that me and C were talking about. Is you know, we've highlighted plenty of times on this show the trials and tribulations and the amount of work that goes into creating a monthly, you know, comic book, you know. But when you think about you know, comic strips and that whole business model and the syndication behind those, you know, that is a extraordinary, you know, feat of labor that goes into creating these comic strips on a daily basis. You know, you think about the writing.
It's a full-time job.
Yeah.
Like you are, like Bill Watterson talks about having to scour and excavate any minute of his life for a possible idea for a story, and how it was just so taxing. But the idea, what the payoff for him was that he was able to say he was a legitimate artist. Like he's like, I'm taking this serious, and I'm not just a joke machine for, you know, insert publication.
And
here.
it wasn't like a lot of strips, especially I guess now it's almost like cut and paste, and it's just serves the punchline. You know, the images are secondary.
Yeah. And I think this is a good point as ever to actually talk a little bit about Mr. Watterson's life. So what I'm about to give is a very hyper-condensed crash course into the very rich career of Bill Watterson. We won't get into the nitty-gritty because there's always Wikipedia for that. There's also a really good documentary from 2013 called Dear Mr. Watterson that I'd recommend if you want to dive into his career and life in greater detail. This is really just to level the playing field for anyone that's listening that maybe isn't familiar with Mr. Watterson's overarching life, which I was kind of in that same boat prior to this episode. I didn't know much about the guy behind, you know, my favorite little kid and his stuffed tiger. So here we go.
Can I also make a recommendation?
Yeah, hit it.
So the Washington Post, and I actually cut it out and I saved it when I was, 1995. I was in 8th grade, about to go into high school. They put out an article called So Long Kid, and it was written by a journalist. His name is Frank Ahrens. So if you can find So Long Kid by the Frank Ahrens Washington Post, it's a tearjerker. It's amazing, and it's a really good tribute to Calvin and Hobbes. I actually still have the cutout article in the 10th anniversary book. It's freaking yellow and old, and I need to laminate it or something.
That's good stuff. All right, here we go. Bill Watterson was born in Washington, D.C. in 1958. He moved to Chagrin Falls, Ohio at 6 years old. Watterson was described by his parents as kind of a recluse child. He was kind of a loner, but he could draw, and he found an escape in the arts. So no surprise there, but he was also a fan of comic strips of the time, like the Peanuts. I think Pogo was one, and the Crazy Cat.
Walt Kelly's Pogo, yeah.
Yeah. Throughout high school and well into college, where Watterson would major in political science, he was feeding that creative fire by drawing comics and superheroes with his friends and contributing cartoons and strips to his school newspapers. He was pretty confident and dead set early on being a professional cartoonist one day. After college and very early on in his career, Bill Watterson would befriend one of his biggest inspirations, Jim Borgman, who was a political cartoonist for the Cincinnati Enquirer, but also the creator of one of my favorite comic strips, proudly the Zits. All right, Bill Watterson, big fan. Wanted to be just like Jim Borgman, so much so that he kind of mimicked Jim Borgman's career pretty faithfully early on. Watterson would land his first professional gig as a cartoonist for the Cincinnati Post, which was for the Cincinnati Post, which was a competing paper to Jim Borgman's Cincinnati Enquirer. But Bill Watterson would not enjoy the same longevity as Borgman because he was fired pretty early on in his contract. Watterson would bounce back, and he found work at an advertising agency as a designer, a career path that we've seen echoed among other comic greats. Neil Adam comes to mind, kind of pursuing
Just
the same.
to jump in, he was doing ads for like a grocery chain, like a grocery store. So he's designing coupons and stuff.
Yeah, and I understand that he wasn't obviously wasn't a really big fan of that work, and that actually kind of motivated him to start working on coming up with comic strip ideas and getting those out and trying to see what would work. Of course, it was here that he developed the comic strip that we're talking about today. Calvin and Hobbes was picked up for syndication by Universal Press Syndication, and it debuted in 35 newspapers on November 18th. Calvin and Hobbes, in its heyday, ran in over 250 newspapers. It was translated across the world for a global audience for a very consistent and very successful 10 years, from 1985 to 1995. But despite immense acclaim and winning a shit ton of awards, for lack of better terms, this guy has so many Eisner and Harvey Awards to his names and collected editions. It wasn't enough to stop him from retiring the strip on November 9th, 1995. He wrote a letter to the editors and fans, initially stating that, quote, "I believe I've done what I can do within the constraints of daily deadlines and small panels." In later interviews, he cited that heated contract renegotiations and pressure from Universal to license and merchandise Calvin and Hobbes played a big role in his decision. He said he was leaving millions of dollars on the table, but it wasn't never enough to make him waver from his anti-merchandising stance, believing that doing so would cheapen his characters. Watterson has since lived a peaceful and private life in Ohio with his wife, pursuing other artistic ventures that come along the way, and staying pretty far away from the press and spotlight. I think he's only really
What's in the water in Ohio, dude?
Right?
I mean, Dave Chappelle lives in Ohio. He did the exact same thing. Left millions of
Right.
dollars on the table for artistic integrity, man.
Well said. Yep. Watterson, for the most part, has stayed away from the press, from the spotlight. Like we said, he's really only kind of graced his loyal fans with the occasional poster, maybe a print here, a comic strip cameo here and there. I believe one of the most notable things he did was he took over for Pearls and Swine one day out of the year and actually drew that whole entire strip. You can find that online pretty easily, but for the most part, it's been kind of dry for Bill Watterson and Calvin and Hobbes fans since then. Ed, you're someone that loves comic history and studying the careers of comic greats like I am. Were you familiar with Bill Watterson's career? Did you learn anything new or interesting in your research?
It's been a while since I've looked at a Calvin and Hobbes comic strip, honestly. And it's one of those things where you revisit it and it's like, it's just as good as you remember it, if not better, because you appreciate it more. But he's always been a mysterious figure, even back then. And like I said, I was familiar, but I did learn some new things. I learned that, like I said, you went over some of them, but like I said, I know that there was a chance for him to get signed by United, but they wanted him to use a character called Robot Man. So it basically goes like, "Hey, this is a cute comic, kid. Let's instead of that tiger, Robot Man. There's this guy over in England, Peter Shelley. He's like a music label executive, pop singer, songwriter type of guy. I'm telling you, kid, we're doing the full Garfield treatment here. We're doing buttons, we're doing underwear, we're doing calendars, we're doing toys." And this was early. This was before he got signed to Universal. So that could have been an instant in right there. Money's on the table, and he turned it down. That's always been the constant thing, is how much his perspective and his integrity, over these years. It's like he could have made. I mean, I've read like they could have made at least $500 million they left on the table.
I'm rich, bitch.
And the fact
like-
that he didn't do it, and the fact that he could have done it, and I don't think he would have lost any respect as an artist. You know what I'm saying? Because I mean, that's like we grow up.
Look, Jim Davis is still around, and nobody shits on him.
So he's the exact opposite. Those are the two because Jim Davis basically he pretty much stopped drawing Garfield in the 80s. Like you look at early Garfield and you look at mid 80s Garfield, that's not the same guy drawing it, but he has that stamp with his name on the corner. That's for damn sure. And he's got about a dozen people running his empire. And I remember reading a thing. It's like I got into this for the art, to draw comics, not to run like a factory of bullshit, you know?
Right.
So that's a crazy thing I didn't know that was, I mean, he had that easy in, and some people would take that as an in, and then, okay, now I can do my thing. I do this. It's like you do the safe picture, then you do the indie artist picture. You know, you do the blockbuster, then you do the artsy stuff. Yeah. You know, just
two for them, one for me.
Yeah, two for them, one for me. But he was steadfast, and it wasn't, I don't know if it was 100% against, I mean, there's a big part of it, but I think the main thing is he wanted the control of what to do. You know, like I said, I know he was approached to do like animation. That's something I learned too. But it was one of those deals where it's like a developmental deal, but it's like, here's $1,000, we get first right refusal. So that's not going to pay the bills for too long. But, you know, like I said, it's another thing I learned too is like he did get his rights when he re-signed in 91, so he was able to get the rights to his characters back. So that's why we still haven't seen any dolls or official merchandise for Calvin and Hobbes. And he kind of went to New Mexico to even be more secluded, you know. So, and I'm sure part of that is like the like his love for, you know, George Harriman's Crazy Cat and his kind of desert. If you look at those Crazy Cat cartoons, you see those ink lines and stuff. You can see, okay, I see where a lot of this is coming from. So
he's got references to it in his own work.
Yeah. So I can picture him like, if you've seen Kill Bill, like Bill's brothers in the desert in a trailer. He's just at the drawing board in the middle of nowhere in the desert, just drawing.
Is that where he ended up retiring? Is in New Mexico?
I think he went back to Ohio.
Okay, got
it.
Yeah,
I think you can stay to New Mexico.
Got it.
How long can you live there, honestly? For real. For real.
So I think the best way, I think we should also say, if you are someone that has seen or owns the infamous, sticker that you'll see in the back of a lot of trucks of Calvin pissing on whatever it may be, right? You can Photoshop whatever underneath the piss. That is a bootleg, ladies and gentlemen, all right? That is not official Calvin and Hobbes merch.
Yeah, and he kind of laughs about it now, but he said it was too much to try to, he can't
hunt it all
sue
down.
Everybody. Yeah, he can't hunt everyone down, so he just kind of let it go. And then along with those Pearl Before Swine, where he did the guest panels, there was also Berkeley Breathed, who was a friend of his. There was like, and I haven't read his stuff in a while, but in 2016 to 2021, Hobbes as the doll would just pop up in random in strips. Not Berkeley's art, but like how Watterson would draw them.
That's cool.
So it could be either what I think happened, and I could see him doing this, is he sent him a blank Bristol board. He had it all paneled out, and he would draw Hobbes in whatever panel, and then he would just write around it. So that's kind of cool. He had that little Easter egg in his comic strips for that long.
Good stuff. Thank you, Ed. I'm going to add one little tidbit to everything you shared, which I think you and Sue might really fuck with this. Bill had a brother named Tom Watterson who in the early 90s had a pop rock band called the Rels. And Bill actually did the artwork for all of the band's releases using a pseudonym Fang Vampire. And if you can find a couple of those cover art.
I knew Bill Watterson was a goth dude.
You can find a couple
if
of
you read Calvin and Hobbes, yeah.
Yeah, it's some depressing stuff.
You can find some of those, album covers and projects that he did on Google pretty easily. But it looks nothing like his art in Calvin Hobbes. If anything, it looks like either the prototype or his best take on Bill Sienkiewicz's style, which I think they were doing, around this time. Bill Sienkiewicz was doing New Mutants. It is super trippy.
Yeah, I could see Hobbes. Sienkiewicz and like Ralph Steadman kind of stuff in there too.
Good stuff. All right. See, I was pleasantly. There are a few. Sorry. See, there's only a few episodes where you will threaten my livelihood if I record without you, and this one I think was one of those for sure. So it was pleasantly it was cool to talk to you all, leading up to this week, and excited for the episode. And I'll be honest, I didn't know that you had that many copies of Calvin and Hobbes, and basically had what it sounds like the entire kind of collected, trades and whatnot. What strips or like material did you specifically read for this episode, and what was like a standout?
Sure. So, and for the record, I did not threaten your livelihood. I would never do that. I would never take another man's money. I threatened your manhood. Okay.
Oh,
I
okay.
said I would.
That's right.
Said I would chop off your wee
Cut off your
if
Johnson.
you did not. Yes, cut off your Johnson, Lebowski. No, I guess. It's hard for me because I'm constantly reading and rereading his stuff, and as far as I'll go on the record as far as this episode is concerned. Calvin and Hobbes is my favorite comic, just because it inspired and influenced me so much. So when you ask me a question like, "Hey, what strips?" it's like, oh man, how do I pick? I'll say the 10th anniversary book is probably a good place to start if you've never read. No, screw that. 10th anniversary is a good place to start if you're a fan and you want to know
His
what
thoughts.
the inside of Bill Watterson's
Yeah.
head looks like. And as a result, there's a strip in there where Calvin and Hobbes find a baby raccoon that's been injured. And Calvin goes to get his mom to see if she can do anything, nurse it back to health, and do something. And it's one of the most heaviest strips. That and the other strip I think that resonated with me was when Calvin broke his father's very expensive pair of binoculars, and he is eating himself alive with guilt for, like, I guess because it's a weekly strip, and every day he's putting something out. So for probably about a good 4 days worth of comic book adventures, you get Calvin just. If you've ever been in a situation where you had borrowed something from a parent or guardian and you broke it and you felt horrible, right? And you didn't know how they were going to act about it. And the pain, he captures it so well. And it's funny because now that I'm a dad, I'm looking at my daughter, and she gives me these, like, she's 9 months old, so she's looking up at me and giving me these kind of like mischievous grins and stuff.
I'm breaking this shit.
And the way she looks is just kind of like, oh man, I'm going to enjoy these comics on another level because Calvin's parents are good. They're good people.
Yeah.
Like it's so. Anyway, 10th anniversary is a good book. It's just all around. And both those strips are in there. You just kind of have to dig through.
Yeah, I kind of want to just follow up on that raccoon one because I was going to mention that as well. And that one is so, like, heavy, like you said, but there's like the follow-up strip was like him kind of like after the main strip where he's like, it's like, man, it's so unfair that, I just met this guy and he died, but in a weird way, I'm happy this happened. So he's learning empathy.
Yeah, he's not nihilistic. Like,
yeah, he's
Calvin
not a sociopath. Calvin is a kid. I never thought of him as a bad kid per se.
Right.
He's
6 years old.
He's 6 years old. And I relate to this a lot. He's just a lonely kid. You look at his world. His parents are, and they're doing. And I don't think the parents are negative figures.
No.
But the parents
they
are
both
always
have jobs.
Yeah, they're. He's always getting punished. His teachers always talking.
And Calvin's parents had a real good marriage.
Yeah, and like the teacher's always browbeating him. He's bullied at school. Susie can only stand him for a few minutes, and his buddy is Hobbes. This is a lonely fucking kid, but he's also a 6-year-old. So he has this enlightened thought of, I'm glad this happened, even though it's so sad. And then the 6-year-old in the final panel is like, what a stupid world.
Yeah. He says,
or what a dumb world or something.
No, it's stupid. Yeah.
Okay.
He says, I wish he wasn't dead. And even though he is, and I'm sad and it
Yeah.
hurts that he's gone, I'm happy to have met him, and I didn't even know he existed
Yeah.
until a couple days ago. And like Ed said, then like the last panel is him walking away with Hobbes saying, "What a stupid world."
Yeah. And there's the 6-year-old.
At the sake
the
of
follow-
sounding, go ahead. See,
I was going to say the follow up to that is there's a whole page, a whole extra days with 4 more panels where Hobbes and Calvin are in bed and they're talking about the nature of death. And they're like, man, like, that's crazy. Like, how this all happened and like, what does it all mean? And then like the last panel is them under their bed because they scared themselves into sort of a weird existential dread. And they're like, why are we talking about this at night?
you know, at the sake of sounding a little meta right now, hearing us easily like how recognizable these stories are, and us kind of throwing off, like these, hey, that strip about the raccoon, hey, the strip about that. It almost sounds it almost sounds like we're talking about our favorite like song or something like that, right? Like our favorite movie. And I think that's a commonality when I talk to other people about Calvin and Hobbes is everyone knows the classics, and then everyone's got their favorite, B-side or strip that maybe, most others don't like. And I think that comes with, and I think that's just a testament to, one, I think the longevity of Bill Watterson's career, even though like compared to maybe some other folks, you're like, there's 10 years is short in maybe the bigger picture of things. But when you drill down to how many 10 years, 365 days in a year, like he was writing a strip almost every day.
And
like,
he had no assistants. A lot of
which
those
is
guys had a
wild,
team,
right? Yeah.
working
One
on
man
it.
shop.
Yeah, just like oh crap, name totally escaped me. Charlie Brown.
Charles
Charles
Schultz?
Charles
Schultz.
Schultz, sorry. Wow, that's weird. But yeah, he's basically Charles Schultz. Even though he kind of had this big kind of commercial empire, he was drawing those strips till the end. You could see with the line and kind of how it was a shakier line towards the end of the Peanuts run. I mean, he was going to the very end, and he even at that point in his life, he worked by himself.
Yeah. I wanted to chime in and say that for this one, I went ahead and dusted off Attack of the Deranged Mutant Killer Monsters Snow Goons trade paperback or collected edition. One,
Snowmen.
because the name is so wild and funny. Snow Goon is a great fucking phrase. That's what I call all my snowmen. Right? I don't make snowmen. I make snow goons.
The one where it's like looked like a car hit him, and or like a group of snow. Oh my god, it's so
that's a good
funny.
But it's not the title story that was my favorite in this collection, but it was one in particular where Calvin and his neighbor Susie are playing doctor and patient.
Oh, that's a great
And the
one.
art style is flipped. Actually, let me see.
It's like Mary Worth or something, like a adventure comic or
It
Yeah.
looks like a
serial
romance comic from the
Yeah.
60s.
yeah. So
Like a baby. I don't want a baby.
So if you don't read it to the very end, you're like, where the
Yeah,
hell is this coming
this
from?
is
Like the
awesome.
art style has changed. Like who are these adults? Who's this doctor? But when you read the dialogue, it is so
It's so
funny. And it's so funny and juxtaposed against like the content of the strip. Right, you've got 2 adults in a doctor's office setting, doing a routine visit. But the dialogue and words coming out of their mouth is like, oh, this is obviously just 2 children fucking
Yeah, even
poking fun
the
at each
first
other.
like throwaway jokes, like I brought something home today. He's like, I hope it's a divorce or something like that.
Oh, that's when they're playing house.
Yeah,
yeah,
he's like,
So,
Mr.
but
Bun can
again-
be our baby. He's like, this.
yeah. It's
So Botter, to I think what you're tapping on here is that typically in Calvin and Hobbes, you have a child and his stuffed tiger speaking like adults. Here, the comedy comes from adults
Yeah.
treating
Flipped on
each
its
other like immature children, and it's chef's kiss good.
Absolutely, and I think it's a prime example of how Bill Watterson's comedy works on so many levels. Like there's the joke at the surface, there's a middle layer, and then there's a deeper one if you want to go that deep. And I think this is a prime example of that, but also the range of Bill Watterson's style and abilities as an artist. Like that, he can go ahead and completely give you a different style in the same collection, and he does this quite a few times, whether it be like going monochromatic, doing the Spaceman Spiff the Spaceman stuff, and some of the other adventures that he puts Calvin in. Like, he shows you, like, I can kind of do it all, right? He doesn't strike me as someone that brags, verbally. He doesn't sound very verbose, but he really lets the his work kind of speak for it.
And it's cool because it's the fantasy part of the strip is the more realistically rendered.
Yes.
So it switches that element of what's fantasy, because he's always said this comic's more than an imaginary friend, a rabbit a tiger that comes to life when, no one else is around. So in going on that, I really loved his dinosaur stuff.
Oh yeah.
And I remember in that 10th anniversary book, there was like one. He said that when Jurassic Park came out, he didn't draw dinosaurs for like a year. he's like, how can I compete with the millions of dollars on screen? But there was one I thought, and you can tell he can kind of think go back to being a kid. There's a couple it relates. One was the Tyrannosaurus Rexes in the F-14s or F-16s.
Classic.
They're flying. And then there's the one where he's flying and then blows up his skull with a jet, and he got so much heat for that. And he's like, it's like, I hated school. Like, what kid didn't dream about, blowing up their school,
Right.
It's like not even in a, and this was before all the, school shootings and stuff happened. This was way before that, but it's just
It's funny.
fantasy.
As a kid reading that, I never got the impression that there was anyone in the school.
Yeah. You
Just
don't, there's not
because he
like
did such a
limbs
good
and
job.
stuff.
Well, he did such a good job of establishing that Calvin isn't, like you said, a sociopath or a mass murderer. Even in his mind as a fantasy, I could see him doing it on the weekend.
Sure.
Or, when because he's a little boy, he wouldn't have time. Even because his brain still works within the logic
he can't
of
do
a
it
kid.
at school. Where's he going to get
Right.
the jet? He's got no time.
Right.
I think at this age of finding Calvin and Hobbes, I think Bart Simpson was also another character that I looked at as a kid, like, oh, I wanted to be Bart Simpson, but I was not going to get an ass whooping for all the shit he's done, right? Like, I was not going to risk that. Calvin, to me, was, I think, who I maybe related to closer at that age, where vivid imagination, didn't have a bunch of friends. I think, my brothers were my friends, right? But school friends-wise, I didn't have a lot, but I was always drawing. So, like, Calvin really resonated with me as a kid, and you would think that Bill Watterson writes Calvin so well, gives him such a unique and believable child. Like, this is an adult writing a child, like a really believable child. You would think like, oh, he's just pulling from his own life. This must have been how he was as a kid, and this is where that well of inspiration is coming from. But then, like I said in the beginning, his parents are telling you, no, he was actually a recluse. He wasn't, very social at all.
Quiet kid.
So even for Bill Watterson, it must have been. I wonder if it was therapeutic to write, like what he wanted to be as a kid. What he wished he would have been able to do.
If you have the 10th anniversary, he talks about it. He says that he loves the character of Calvin because he's so not like him.
Yeah.
He says, I love writing for Calvin because I'm nothing like him, and it's easy for me to put myself in a state of, okay, what wouldn't I have done as a child? and just really go in places where my mind is like, this is fun.
That's
because it's not me. And
Especially,
he says he very often disagrees with Calvin.
yeah, and that's kind of what Hobbes. That's kind of where he kind of argues against the imaginary friend thing, because they are always at odds. They have a lot in common, but there's a lot of philosophical differences between the two, named after the philosophers.
Yeah, Tom Hobbes and John Calvin.
But even like when you said, it's like when he would do the strips with the kid drawings and the kid style lettering, it's like that guy is a fantastic letterer.
Oh yeah.
Like,
Oh, yeah.
he would do like when Calvin's drawing something to show his dad or whatever, and it goes back to like, it looks like a legit children's drawing. It's like he's so technically precise in his work.
I think I would be able to pick out that typeface for Calvin and Hobbes and the font he uses from anywhere. You could just have it lined up in a bunch of other types, and I could probably pull that out. I wanted to make one more mention as far as one of my favorite comic strips. And this was one that honestly I was introduced to just this morning by Cesar. We hopped on a call, just sharing our excitement for the episode, getting
Oh,
warmed
I know
up.
you're going with this.
And I was asking him what his favorite was. I was telling him about the doctor one, and C shared with me one I hadn't seen. It was one I don't think it had an official name, but it starts off. First there was nothing, then there was Calvin, and it's basically Calvin imagining himself as God, creating a universe.
That's a good one.
See what I'm saying? Is like I don't even have to. There is no
He's like,
names or
just has
titles
his
for
hand.
these.
Yeah, he's
But
got the beard.
These
Yeah,
are
that's
the
a
best
great
hits,
one.
right? Like
Yeah.
Calvin and Hobbes has got so. Anyways, that strip is so good. Like, and once again, art style completely throws you off in the beginning. You're like, oh shit, okay, this is one of those stories where the imagination, this is that perspective. In the last two panels, or I don't even think the last two. I think the last panel brings it home, and you realize, oh, it's Calvin playing with these new toys of his, and he's playing God or whatnot.
So
Dude.
there's an example of what you're talking about. Like, what syndicated newspaper or comic strip artist was basically saying, okay, here are the influences I'm going to pull in for this particular episode. I'm going to use Michelangelo's, version of God visually. I'm going to comedically kind of spoof the idea of maybe some of these religions that portray God in a bloodthirsty way might be saying something about the childish nature of that kind of a God. While also then kind of bringing it home and saying, by the way, the stakes are freaking low, guys. I wasn't really saying any of that because turns out it's just a shitty little kid playing with Tinker toys. Yeah. And his parents are none the wiser, right? Like, so it's like there's so much going on, and there's so much setup, punchline. And
Is that
again,
the one where, like, he's been quiet for a while? We better go check on him.
and no, it's literally only one panel,
Yeah.
and the parents are proud. Like, it's like, Calvin's really been, really taken with these Tinker toys. Like, he hasn't said much. Like, it's kind of like, yes, he's acting like a crazy god, this evil deity.
It is imagination squared, captured on paper. Like, once again, going back to like how multi-layered it is, these characters are products of Watterson's imaginations. So you've already got that, but then he's portraying the imaginations of said imagined characters that he came up with, right? Like it is so multi-layered, and like I said, you could take it at face value. It's a really well drawn strip, very funny. You could go down deeper down the rabbit hole to where Cesar took it, and then there's that middle layer. It's just impressive all around, and to think that he was able to do this, 365, 7 days a week, whatever it may be. Yeah, he had to dig in some very deep places.
Yeah, another one. Man, we could just talk about all that.
Exactly.
I know.
We're basically doing the best of hits. And
another running gag as far as just imagination, and this is even without the drawing prowess, is the transmogrifier box, where he just has a cardboard box.
Oh man!
And he one of my favorite panels is where he wants to be a tiger, and he comes out as like a little Hobbes, and they both look at each other. And I say this a lot. Like Hobbes goes, words fail me, and like
that's a good line. Yeah.
And
another
even Calvin's imagination screws him over.
Yeah,
and
I'll just do a couple more. Sorry, I'm just do besides the artwork, just the way his dad would mess with him. Like one of my favorite ones, and this is a pretty simple talking one. There's no, like crazy landscapes or beautiful artwork, but it's just as Calvin just asked, "Why are old pictures in black and white?" And he's like, "Oh, it's because the world was black and white. We didn't get color till like the 30s, and it was still kind of grainy." And it's like, "Wait a minute. Well, what about all the paintings? How did they become color?" It's like, "Well, they became color with everything else." And there's like a whole page of him convincing him that like color didn't exist before 1930, just awesome. Messing with them. And it's like, man. And another one, which is a very Calvin thing too. It's a short one. And he asks his dad, "Hey Dad, what's wind?" And his dad's like, "Oh, that's just trees sneezing." And then Calvin's like, "Really?" He's like, "No, but the truth is more complicated." And then the last panel is Calvin fighting the wind. It's like, man, the trees are really sneezing today.
That's good stuff. All right, I'm going to stop myself from also jumping in on this best of Calvin hit list, and I want to move on. I want to move the conversation to talking about some of the themes that you find prevalent in his work. We've kind of touched on some of them. I want to go a little deeper into what are some of the themes that you find abundant in his work, and let's see if you don't mind taking that first.
Sure. I think, well, I answered this and I wrote it in the document. I know you saw it. I don't know if his work is thematic so much as it is an autobiography written in parable. And if there is a theme to his work, I think it's never underestimate the reader's appetite for quality. That's what I would say the theme is to
those little
Calvin's
pause
work.
breaks.
That pregnant pause was
Drop.
nice.
Drop this mic. Hold on. Let me get it out of the Yeah.
That's a good mic seat. Damn, well said. I was gonna, if you don't mind me trying to add to that, I've got that. I think the master theme would probably be like childhood imagination embodied, and then he tends to sprinkle in like commentary too, like on the comic medium, the occasional commentary about the industry that he's in, his working and personal encounters with fame and what he had going on, but I don't think you would catch that. It's not very apparent unless you knew about like his struggles, with the syndication thing and pressure to merchandise. Like he does a really, aside from, I think this is where his private nature benefits the comics, where it doesn't feel, unless you know what's going on. If you know. Besides that, it just kind of comes off like a regular Calvin and Hobbes like adventure or whatnot. And I think once again that kind of goes back to that multi-layered. Like if you knew what was going on behind the scenes, then you can kind of catch certain Easter eggs. But I don't think he ever lets the behind the scenes drama take center stage. It's always about like embodying like innocence and childhood imagination.
Yeah, there's, like I said, I can't really put one wide net over it because he does tackle a lot of different things. Even if it's just for a strip, he'll make fun of art criticism. But I would say it's like there's some really subversive kind of misanthropic stuff about humanity, which is, Hobbes' nature, or Hobbes the philosopher's, basically his philosophy, and just boundless imagination. But there's that, and maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm just projecting because of my childhood. But there's like this loneliness and this kind of escapism with this imagination. That's it's a lot of reflective stuff, a lot of insightful things. But I see it, and I see this with Peanuts too, where it's just kind of this you're making the best of a relentlessly cruel world. You're like I said, Charlie Brown never gets the redhead girl, never wins the baseball game. Everyone calls him a blockhead, never kicks the football. That kid is just, but he still goes through his only friend is Snoopy. I see a lot of like parallels there. It's
good people won't add to the misery that this world has doled out randomly, and if they can make it a little bit better, then that's what we need to concentrate on.
And it's like that
Even
last
Calvin,
strip.
as imperfect and as petulant sometimes as he is, and as you said, misanthropic as he is, he still adds to the world with his creativity, his imagination, and his empathy.
And it's just like that last strip where it's like, well, we have this blank canvas. Let's go exploring the world. It's a nice reset point. We have chances in life that we can reset things. We can start over. We can kind of take a new path. And it's basically, that snow represents that. It's like, let's go exploring. And he just drives off. It's a beautiful end to that strip.
Well said.
Yeah.
All right, I would be remiss if I didn't get the opinions of you two artists on this next one. What do you think makes Bill Watterson's art style unique? So I want to look specifically at from an artistic lens and eye. Like what is unique about his style that sets him apart from some of his contemporaries? Ed, if you want to take that one, you go.
Well, I think what set him apart, especially for comics at the time, was just the skill level he would develop. And I'm not saying a lot of these artists can't draw, maybe Scott Adams. He doesn't draw that word.
Yeah.
But
you took the words out of my mouth.
But the visuals are secondary in a lot of comics during that day. But he wanted to put those visuals in the forefront. He's old school. He's using a Winsor brush. He's using pen nibs. He's using classic equipment. He's not. This is pre-digital coloring, or at least the early stages of digital coloring. He's working in these very strict parameters, and he's basically, not every strip looks different. Even if it's just Calvin standing around, you never see like a stock cut and paste foreheads with a punchline. That's what set him apart. I mean, he's like a throwback. He was like a throwback to George Harriman, to Winsor McCay, to a lot of those classic newspaper artists when the medium was at least given more room to be expressed, given more room in the paper. So I think his style, stylistically, when you looked at that, like especially when I was a kid, and it could be is because I'm kind of growing up at the time, and that's why the influence is there, where I don't see it in like a Pogo or a Crazy Cat. Still kind of it's like, this is very, very strange, but pretty. It's beautiful, but I don't really get it. And Pogo is of its time. It's pretty. It's some cool stuff here. I don't really get it, but Calvin and Hobbes is like, okay, this is what I kind of grew up with, So it makes sense to me. It calls out to me, and it got me looking at these older, artists. It's one of those things where once you find out their influences, you okay, oh, let's go check that out. This is what he likes. This got to be good, So I don't know. I think the technical skill that he was showing at comics that time, it popped off the page, especially when he was getting that half-page layouts and playing with the panels, where it wasn't just the 9-panel grid, or however many panels it was. It was 6. Just like circles. It was no panels. It was just one big picture sometimes. Man, he was really doing some inventive stuff in a medium that doesn't exist anymore, essentially.
Well said. Thank you, Ed. So you want to chime in on that?
Sure. So Watterson is unique in that he desperately wants to shove in as much artistic beauty in as many styles as you can shake a stick at in 6 panels on Sunday and 4 every day of the week. That's a lot of art. And his contemporaries, as far as I'm concerned, they're not Scott Adams. They're not Gary Trudeau. And that's not throwing shade on those guys. They're Neil Adams. They're Al Williamson. They're Gary Gianni. I name drop Gary Gianni and Al Williamson because they both worked on Prince Valiant, which is another one of those art strips that, like, say what you want about the story, but the artwork is fantastically beautiful. Alex
it's so
Raymond,
boring. It's boring but beautiful.
God damn, it's boring, but it looks good.
Bernie Wrightson too. I'll throw him in there. But since
you can
our
say
listeners,
even like Wally Wood, Frank Rosetta, those guys started in strips too.
Sure.
Yeah.
Since our listeners are maybe more familiar with comic books as opposed to the graphic art of comic strip, I would compare him to Stuart Immonen in that both he and Stuart Immonen are similar in that they can change styles at the drop of a hat to match the story. I mean, so if you've ever seen anything like that Stuart Immonen has done, Bill Watterson is like the comic strip
the
equivalent.
versatility.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well said. I'll add in that I think there is a believable and effortless movement between panels whenever he draws, especially any strip involving Hobbes pouncing on Calvin, which it's kind of a running gag.
It's definitely kinetic.
Stories. Yeah, right. Like the gutters, like the way he shows movement in those specific comics, like your eye, like it just flows really well, even between the gutters. Like there's nothing there, but the way he draws it, it's kind of like a seamless connection from the previous panel, even though, and the way he plays with time too, right? Like it's not every second, but you can still see, like your mind still kind of fills in the blanks in between that kind of gutter spaces. I'll also say like his settings, man, whimsical, really detailed, and it feels like he transports you like on location, right? Like grew up in Jacksonville, Florida all my life, right? But when I read Calvin and Hobbes, I feel like I'm being transported to a small town or on a home that's got like some woods in the back. And I've fucking never seen woods, right?
I'm going to say, let me tell you right now, he nails it. I didn't grow up in Florida, so and now that I've lived here long enough, I realize there's nothing but just swamp and palm trees, and the seasons don't change. Up north, I was able to enjoy Calvin and Hobbes because I did build snowmen. I did go out sledding. I've had a cold in the wintertime, and it sucks. And all the stuff that they're talking about, and like waiting for summer to come, and like, oh, I can't wait, because you're like, this winter's awesome for the first 2 months, and then you're like, oh, we got how many more months of this? And then you get the flu or whatever. But anyway, like, yes, Botter, he nails it.
Yeah. And I'll go ahead and say it. I think he draws some of the best snow. Like, his snowy settings are so good. And like John Romita Jr., I think, draws rain. Like, really, he draws rain like it is like pouring, 40 days and 40 nights. Bill Watterson in snow is a match made in heaven. You feel like you could, like, grab snow from the comic itself and make a little snowball. And last but not least, I'll say Bill Watterson nails expressions. Like, the range of faces that he can give Calvin are so impressive, and it feels like there's no limit to, what facial expression Calvin may have. And that is one thing that I think made it really stand out to me when I was really into comic strips and reading, the daily paper and the Sunday paper, was comic strips like Garfield, and even Boondocks. Even though I loved Boondocks, I really enjoyed Garfield. It got a little stale because it was always the same facial expression. The character designs didn't really change a lot. Like, you just knew what you were getting into. But with Calvin and Hobbes, right, like we had mentioned, he plays around with the style so much. And, the face is always like are really emotive. And I think that's what really sets it apart from some of his contemporaries.
For sure.
Now, gents, like we've kind of mentioned, Bill Watterson is a very private person. You can count on two hands how many interviews he has granted the public in the span of his career. Like, literally, you could count them all on like two hands very easily. And that list is even shorter if you're counting official artwork that he's put out to the public since the end of Calvin and Hobbes. Like, he's very selective with his projects, if he takes any projects at that. Like, the man is a recluse to the highest magnitude. I was curious to hear from both of you. Do you think Watterson's private nature and the lack of like merchandising and that stuff, has that had a positive or negative impact on the legacy of Calvin and Hobbes and potential discoverability for like future generations? So you want to take that?
If you ask me when I'm 10, I will tell you why can't I buy a Hobbes stuffed animal? But I'm 10 and I'm an idiot. If you ask me now, I think he did the best possible thing as an artist. He brought so much credibility to anybody that's ever wanted to do a newspaper style strip. Anyone that's ever wanted to do it and thought, well, the only way I can and hold on to my artistic integrity, I don't care about the money, is to sell out. And he was like, no, you don't have to do that. If you care about the art form, then care about the art form. He lives. He's never going to die. Like, the Calvin and Hobbes is his Bible. It's autobiographical. Like, he's in 10 years, he's managed to basically let you peek inside of how he thinks about things politically, philosophically, what his views are on the afterlife, what he thinks of his mom and dad. Does he believe in the power of love, imagination, loyalty, friendship, bureaucratic systems? I mean, he's institutions, favorite foods. He's got it all in there. Like, it's really, really cool. And I think that his work is an exercise in parable, and I can have a good time anytime I pick up any one of those books and not worry about whether or not the integrity of his work was ever compromised. I can't speak for the future. After he passes away, I don't know what's going to happen, and something evil and some draconian, machination might make it so where his stuff is available for the public to consume in a way that is not in line with his wishes. We'll burn that bridge when we get to it. But for now, he's the GOAT.
Well said. Well said. And I think when you think about what you just shared, I think it amplifies what Watterson himself shared in that last letter to the editors, which was, for lack of better terms, I've said everything I've had to say. Ed, what about you, man? What are your thoughts on lack of merchandising and impact on the legacy?
Yeah, I agree. I agree with C. It adds to his mythos. It's like I don't want to see him on Twitter talking about like
Damn, you're
political
right.
views. I think he's like, for me, as private as I am, he's kind of like, if I could have made it as an artist, that's like, man, this is like the perfect career. Although I would love some action figures of my stuff. I'm not gonna lie, but you could. It's like you said, he believed in the art form over like the I remember reading something where it's like, it's not, if we can, merchandise, is like, why should we need to ask why we're doing this. And I don't think, because like I said, we even like growing up in the 80s and 90s, we're used to like, okay, we get the comic, we get some toys, we get the movie, we get the, but he wanted, and he could be a control freak. I don't know. I don't need to know the man personally. It's like, I kind of like that mystery about him. I don't want to know his, picadillos and his odd, things that make up everybody. Sometimes you just want some distance. And I think, and I'm glad he came up without Twitter and social media and stuff. Although I'm kind of curious to what he thinks about the Wild West we have now as far as doing comic strips, where
he loves it. It's actually in the first 4 pages of the 10th anniversary. He talks about how not comic strips, comic books.
Yeah,
he says they're flourishing. Mm-hmm. This is 1995, so that means he's aware of what's going on. And at that point, Image had already come out. Mm-hmm. By that point, Marvel and DC were already well established.
But even
names.
like webtoons or even like daily strips that are just online specifically.
Oh, I'm
like
sure he's jazzed about that.
You know what he would say? He'd say, "Y'all ain't getting paid for it. It could not be me."
Yeah, that's the thing too. That's what you give up, because you have this publishing house, the syndication, where I think he made. He didn't need to get rich, but I think he's all right because of the book sales. They're New York Times bestsellers. They've been in reprints, millions of editions. Like I said, those nice hardcovers that came out 5 or 6 years ago. There's going to be another hardcover set that comes out, I'm sure. He's getting those checks still. Yeah. So I'm not worried about him financially. But it's nice that he basically did something artistic completely on his terms, and that's rare.
Yeah.
Nobody meddled with him. Nobody. And even the merchandising things, I think if he signed off, like, he wouldn't even have to like run a factory. And I don't think if he put out a limited edition statue or dolls or something, I don't think anyone would call him a sellout. It's like, this is, once you get into like the kids' meals and, once you get into like underwear and like all kinds of crazy shit, and then we can have that talk. But he just stood firm, and he could have cashed out, and he could still cash out. He could come up and say, I want to make a Hobbes doll official. Put them in Targets, $20. Right. He could do that in a snap.
He holds himself to such a rigorous standard. Like the normal is here and his standard is here, and it's like, Bill, we just want you to meet us in the middle.
And that's that thing with artists always say, we don't do it for the money, but we need money to pay shit. JEA don't accept. Will
you take this trade for my electricity bill?
Yeah. So here's the cool thing about what you just said, Ed, is that Roger Corman has this really cool speech where he talks about film being a compromised art form, in the sense that if it's just one guy making a movie, which means he has the money to make it, to buy all the equipment, he's the only person doing all the work, shooting, editing, lighting, all that stuff.
Yeah.
Then that is the one singular piece of work that will not be compromised artistically, right? But that's not the way it works. It's you have to hire people, camera people, you have to hire all this stuff. So now because it's a business, movies are a compromised art form. So it's kind of hard to criticize them because they're compromised, right? I still do, and I still try, and it makes me cry and it hurts my penis. But
let me see a doctor.
There's no hope for me. Anyone that knows me, there's no hope for me. But the cool thing about Bill Watterson is that he did it.
Mm-hmm.
He is the one-man show, and his work is not compromised in the least artistically. So it's like even comic strips by their nature are a compromised medium in the sense that, look, you can be a freaking Michelangelo all you want, but at the end of the day, these things are here to sell papers.
Mm-hmm.
And he worked within that world and fought and wrangled and every day he took sabbaticals. It was just like, I need breaks, and anyway.
And I got to even hand it to the Syndicate. I mean, in that beginning where he had no clout, they could have made dolls. They technically own the rights to it. So,
yeah. And
I don't know if that's part because of the book sales were doing so. I don't know all the behind the scenes, but the fact that they could have pushed that.
Oh yeah.
They could have said, "Sorry, bro, I'm going to get someone else to draw this now." And hit the bricks, Junior. So they withheld and they kept up their end of the bargain, which is rare as well.
Surprising as hell, right?
Yeah.
I'll go ahead and chime in and say I think Bill Watterson has left it in the hands of fans like us to pass it along to the next generation. I think if you're considering how this current generation consumes media and the need for being on digital, merchandising, for awareness, things like that. I think when you think about it from that perspective, it leaves much to be desired. But then you've got folks like us that are keeping his name alive. See, I can imagine, when Sammy comes of age, you'll probably be reading Calvin and Hobbes to her, right? We are the generation.
I'm getting her a stuffed tiger.
And painting it yourself. Yeah, we are the generation, I think, that will keep Calvin and Hobbes alive. In regards to the comic industry, Bill Watterson was actually just recently inducted into the Will Eisner Award Hall of Fame. I think he was inducted in 2020. So in regards to the comic industry, they're still, he's still making news. They're still, showing their appreciation. But I would like to think, much like reading Calvin and Hobbes, the actual strips, it's not always. I don't think it's always going to come easy, right? Watterson never spoon-fed, you the jokes or the meanings and things like that.
No.
So I don't think he's worried if a new generation finds it or gets it. I think it's a chapter of his life that is now closed, that he put his all into and he enjoyed. And I would imagine that for him it's well, if you find it and you love it, great. If you don't, that's on you.
Yeah, I don't think he's.
I'll tell a story that
legacy.
I'll tell a story that is to your point. When he was in Ohio, he would very sneakily go into a bookstore and autograph his books and then put them back in there for people to buy and not tell anybody. You
think he ever got caught? Hey, this asshole's writing in the books. Get him.
He stopped doing it because people were selling them online.
Yeah.
And when he found out, he was like, "Okay, Jesus, I can't even
have
do
nice
this."
Things. Yeah.
Yeah.
Damn, I've never met someone so allergic to capitalism than Bill Watterson. I love it.
It's I try to fuck you guys.
Yeah.
You'll never see me again. Ninja vanish.
All right. With that said, the chances of Bill ever hearing this episode are definitely slim to none. He doesn't have a Twitter. I don't even think he's probably got a phone.
Mr. Watterson, I'm so sorry if we've offended you.
He's in the woods. He's painting a lake somewhere.
Exactly.
I can't live my life knowing if I've made him mad or if he doesn't like me. I don't want to know. I feel like
you'll never know.
He's on that Bob Ross tip. He's like, it's all right, brother. You guys suck, and that's okay. Embrace it. I probably got to see the laugh.
I got my cabin made out of gold. Yeah. I got my
he's straight. And now that
2,500 acres in Ohio.
And now that he doesn't strike me as the kind of guy that would indulge himself in praise. Anyways, but regardless, I think we did him and Calvin and Hobbes proud with this episode. I think we covered as much as we could for today's intent and purposes. So I'll address the listeners. All right, if you enjoyed this deep dive and this style of conversation, Check out other artist spotlights that we've done, like the one we did about Rick Remender, one of the hardest working names in comics, back in episode 369. And if you're a fan of Calvin and Hobbes, if you know something about Bill Watterson that we don't know, that you'd like to share with us, man, chime into the conversation. Shoot us an email, hit us up on Twitter and Instagram. Let me know if you want me to share it on the episode. We'd love to hear from fellow Calvin and Hobbes fanatics. Let's get to our next topic for today, all right? And that's looking at the future of comics and the titles worth picking up next month. Let's go ahead and grab a fistful of comics.
You can either have a mouthful of teeth or a fistful of comics.
Fistful of Comics is a segment dedicated to helping all you comic curious newbies and regular Wednesday warriors find the best new titles worthy of your time and attention.
Weenie and the butt.
Of course, we are lucky enough to be joined by Ben Kingsbury for this part of the show. He's the owner of Gotham City Limit, Jacksonville's premier comic shop, and nothing makes this man happier than helping people take their comic shopping experience to the limit. He has provided me with a list.
Oh, I haven't heard this.
Scarface, anyone?
I love it that you're like, and it's like, look, only 2 seconds, seconds, so we won't be busted for copyright infringement.
That's funny. All right, Ben has provided me. First of all, before I get into that, Ben was really excited to hear that we were doing a Calvin and Hobbes episode today. Ben's already at a 10, right, as far as energy goes. When he heard we were doing a Calvin and Hobbes episode, his energy's now like at a 15. So we did something really special with this week's list and recommendations. Like he always does, he provided me with a list of 3 new comics that he thinks are worthy of the short box stamp of approval. I'm gonna get the music going, and we're gonna see what's on the agenda today. All right, first up. So like I said, he was super excited about the Calvin and Hobbes. He's got a whole theme for these recommendations, and an interesting one at that. So I'm gonna let him tell you what his first pick is.
Good morning, good afternoon, and or good evening, Short Box listeners. I'm Ben K, representing Gotham City Limit, Jacksonville, Florida. And these are my 3 final order cutoffs you should add to your pull list immediately. You know what's weird? Day by day, nothing seems to change. But pretty soon, everything is different. That's probably one of my favorite Bill Watterson quotes. I'm a huge Calvin and Hobbes fan. Still own all my original Calvin and Hobbes books from when I was a young man. My best friend, Pacer the Amazing Shop Dog, and I live our lives like we imagine Calvin and Hobbes would. So in honor of Calvin and Hobbes, here's my FOC picks with a little dynamic duo twist. First up, Marvel Comics Rogue and Gambit #1. Destiny strikes for your favorite X-Men duo. With Destiny kidnapping Rogue, it's time to hop on for a thrill ride with Rogue and Gambit that will lay bare some of Krakoa's biggest secrets. Calvin and Hobbes, Rogue and Gambit, peanut butter and jelly. Add this to your pull list now.
That's funny. That's funny.
I would have never thought to imagine to put Rogue and Gambit in the same conversation as peanut butter and jelly and Calvin and Hobbes. And I had a thought listening to that voicemail. Is Ben and Pacer the grown-up version of Calvin and Hobbes? I never kind of like looked at it that way, but now I had to do a double take. All right, Rogue and Gambit #1 comes out March 1st. All right, that's the first comic. That's the first pick on Ben's list. This next one continues this theme of dynamic duos, but Ben's taking us to outer space to highlight a iconic dynamic duo in comic books. Here's Ben for you.
Next up on the list, another dynamic duo, Han Solo and Chewbacca, issue number 10. Why issue number 10? Because this is the first issue of a major new event coming to the Star Wars universe. We all know the hardest part of going to a comic book shop is figuring out where to start. Well, if you love anything to do with Star Wars and or Han Solo Chewbacca, make sure you add this one to your pull list. Han Solo and Chewbacca, Calvin and Hobbes, peanut butter and jelly. Get this one added.
All right, Ben, look, not everybody can be a peanut butter and jelly dynamic duo, right? Nah,
I'm gonna tell you right now, I'm getting hungry. He needs to stop. I'm getting real hungry right now.
Han Solo and Chewbacca also hit shops March 1st. Get that on your poll if that piques your interest. And last but not least on this list, Ben is wrapping up strong. He's bringing us back Earthside for a husband and wife combo that we all know and love.
And finally, DC Comics presents Superman #1. What's this dynamic duo? Well, Superman and Clark Kent, of course. All right, well, that's a stretch. However, I needed to fit this one in. Joshua Williamson, who is absolutely crushing all of DC's new comics, including the Lazarus Planet series ongoing right now, is back to bring in the dawn of the new DC, Superman #1. Jamal Campbell doing the artwork. That's a dynamic duo in and of itself. So that's it. Those are my FOC's picks of the week. Thanks for being here. Remember, with great power comes great responsibility, and always take it to the limit.
There we go. That was Ben Kingsbury, ladies and gents, and you've just been taken to the limit.
All right. Our lawyers are they're backing down. They're backing down.
Our lawyers got
The
us, all right?
stopwatches.
That is fair use right there. All right,
Ladies and gentlemen, how many of your local comic book shop owners have the personality and the sheer chutzpah to go on this podcast and basically say, "Hey, look, guys, I'm gonna be on here talking about peanut butter and jelly." Just so you'll come into the store and have an experience, all right? Ben is willing to go out of his way to go crazy and be silly for the sake of you, the listener, to come out to Gotham City Limit and have an awesome experience at his store. Come on, you can't say no to this man. You guys got to go there. Get your butts over there, for God's sake. For Ben's sake.
I'm gonna go ahead and say it. If you buy, I feel like if you buy any of these titles, Rogue and Gambit #1, Han Solo, Chewbacca, or Superman #1, Ben should give you a free peanut butter and jelly sandwich.
A free peanut butter and jelly sandwich.
I think that'd be a
oh
great
my gosh.
A crustable at least.
A crustable. That's a little safer. That's a little safer.
Easier to store.
All right, gents, of the three options that Ben has given us, which one is worthy of making it on your pull list? Which one gets your stamp of approval? Go ahead, C.
Man, I have been in a real Superman kick recently. So I'm going to hit Superman for sure.
All right, cool. What about you, Ed?
I think as much as she is way too good for this douchebag, I'm going to do Rogue and Gambit.
Rogue murdered someone. What are you talking about? She's perfect for Gambit.
Still too good.
They're both like the
piece of the shit.
They're both like the trashiest people on the X-Men.
I'll take my trash Southern, thank you. Well, they're both Southern. Non-Creole.
Yeah.
I charge things.
Yeah.
Worst X-Man ever.
We don't count New Orleans as the South, right?
Oh my God.
No, I'm kidding. All right. To our New Orleans population tuning in.
Yo,
you guys are a different type of South.
Doesn't care about black people.
I think I'm gonna echo C on this one. I'm gonna go Superman #1. Because there's a shit ton of covers, alternate covers for that issue, and I'm here for it, man. DC has gotten my attention for a good bit now.
The first non-Batman title in 6 months.
Right?
Shit.
Right? Yeah. So I'll probably check out Superman #1, and all that it comes out sooner than the rest, and you guys know I'm impatient as hell, so I'm gonna check that out. But listeners, that is the list for today. If any of those grab your attention, heed Ben's words, all right? Go to your local comic shops, get your pre-orders in, and a big shout out to Ben.
Get your sandwich.
Yeah, and get your well, no, that's the thing, see? If they're going to another comic shop, I mean, more power to them, but they ain't getting the BB&J deal.
No, I didn't say go to another comic shop. I said go take it to the limit and get your sandwich.
There we go. Big shout out to Ben for the help this week. And remember, even if you're unfortunate to not live in Jacksonville, you bums, you can still take it to the limit by shopping at GothamCityLimit.com for comics and exclusive variants you won't find anywhere else.
Oh, wait, they can do it online?
Yeah.
Oh,
that's what I'm saying.
They got
no excuse. No
excuse. None.
All right, next up, we'll talk about how we've been spending the non-comic reading parts of our free time. But we're gonna go stretch our legs for a little bit and go on a quick music break. I've been, I'm still finding new stuff in this music folder that DJ Crumbs gave me a few years ago, and it always feels like I'm coming across a new song I like, and this is one of them. So enjoy the music, and we'll be right back.